let's start with you, Jeff. Why did you take on this issue, and why is the issue of transgender ideology so important for Summit Ministries, which works to Christian worldview formation? Why this subject?
Brendan, we've talked about this a lot as a Summit Ministries team. We exist to equip and support the rising generation to embrace God's truth and champion a biblical worldview. Our topics very commonly are worldview, apologetics, cultural engagement. But we realized we can't be silent on the issue of gender ideology because it is an attack on the very idea of truth itself. This attack is attempting to undo a generation's understanding of reality. And we are talking about reality here. The panelists were able to give factual evidence about this, but there are 6,500 cataloged biological differences between males and females. Every cell of your body, with the exception of a handful of cells related to sexual reproduction, is stamped XX if you're a woman, XY if you are a man, in your chromosomal structure. The idea that you can be a boy and become a girl is a lie. It is a lie about biology, and it's a lie about personhood. And so we did not believe that we could stay silent on this issue. And I will tell you furthermore, I'm very concerned for this rising generation because now through the transgender movement and similar other movements based on a postmodern ideology of life, they have now come to see the denial of objective reality as a commendable social good. And I'll tell you, if you know anybody in the field of psychiatry or addiction recovery, they will all tell you this. If you are sick in one of those ways, the very first thing you must do to get well is to grapple with reality as it actually exists. And some of you may have been in that situation. Maybe you are in recovery. You know, as long as you are lying to yourself, you will never get well. Well, the same thing that is true personally is also true in terms of relationships. Psychologists talk about what they call attunement. You cannot even connect with another person if you don't have a shared understanding of reality. And I believe the same thing that is true for relationships is also true for societies.
Jeff, in our ebook, Exposing the Gender Lie, we have an entire chapter talking about how the twisting of language, it was spoken of earlier, but the twisting of words, the overtaking of our very means of communication is a feature, not a bug, of this ideology. How does transgenderism warp the very words that we use, and why is that such a detrimental thing, and why should we care about that?
Before I answer the question, let me say we did print up copies of the book so that you can all have them as our gift to you. So those are available when you leave today. This is not a sales pitch. I want you to be equipped with good information, and there are 102 references inside the book that you will see at the end that document from mostly secular sources the things that we are saying to be true. So a quick lesson about what's been happening in academia for decades. A lot of people ask, how did this arise so suddenly? Well, it didn't. 30 years ago, in the academic world, students were being taught that there is no objectively knowable reality. All you have are your perceptions. And it became popular, even in popular culture, to say perceptions are reality. Well, that had an academic component to it. And in the postmodern way of looking at things, reality doesn't exist and we describe it with words. The words are the reality. Okay, there is no reality outside of the words that we use. So however we use words then makes reality, not reveals reality. So instead of saying people should seek the truth, now people say you should speak your truth. Okay, that's where that idea came from. It is not new. It's been going on for decades. Virtually every university professor believes that. There have even been a lot of debates that I've had with Christian professors who teach this as well. I don't think they grasp the full reality of what they're teaching, because if words have no identifiable relationship to reality, then words like male and female don't matter anymore. But neither do words like justice or liberty. And all of a sudden, there's a severing between what we need to live together as a community and how we can actually talk about it. So when transgender twists language and insists upon pain of penalty, if you're a journalist, you'll get fired if you don't do this, that you refer to biological men who identify as women as transgender women. You must use that terminology. If you're in the corporate world, you don't do it, you'll be fired. Okay? So it's no longer the case that people just have their own reality. It is now the case that they have their own reality, and if they can gain political power, because justice doesn't mean anything anymore, then they can insist that everyone else acknowledge their reality or be punished. That's the situation in which we find ourselves. And so the rising generation is, we state this very strongly in our book, and I'll stick by it. Voltaire, the philosopher, was not a good man, but he had an interesting insight many, many years ago in a very different context. He said, if you can get people to believe absurdities, you can get them to commit atrocities. And what we're seeing, the atrocities we're seeing now are not like Nazi Germany. They are not like the Hutu in Rwanda slaughtering the Tutsis. But there is a very similar situation. In those cases, the very first thing that happened is the people in charge dehumanized the vulnerable, stopped calling them human. For example, the Hutu would call the Tutsis cockroaches. The Nazis would call Jews vermin. You dehumanize them, then you can destroy them. And so you'll find that the very people who insist that you use language in a particular way, that you use their chosen pronouns, that you refer to them using the language that they insist on, if you don't do it, you will be called all kinds of names. Evil, bigoted, transphobic, and so forth. So isn't that interesting? But the only thing that really explains it is a breakdown of language as a way of understanding reality.
Well, and I have to just share this little anecdote from our book. I'm pretty sure it's this chapter. We have the passage of an introduction to the chapter. We have that passage of Genesis talking about the Tower of Babel. And next to it, we have some words from Julia Long, who's a radical feminist lesbian British academic who says, and I quote, "The word trans has one function, and that is to falsify reality. If you have a word where a man can mean a woman, everything is reversed." She's right. The truth is true no matter who says it.
Yeah. Well, you think about how that has propaganda value.
Yeah.
And again, you could easily overstate this, and maybe I am. But if you can get children to look at one another and say there's no difference between a boy and a girl, you can get them to believe anything and say anything.
It's psychological abuse. Yeah. Final question, Jeff, before we segue into some prayer time at the conclusion. I think sometimes people think, oh, you conservative-leaning Christians, you just want to enshrine rigid gender norms again. You just want to return to the 50s or whatever. And in the final chapter of our book, Exposing the Gender Lie, we actually interviewed some folks, Celebrate Kids, Kathy Cook and Don Hannigan. And, gender norms are usually arise from culture. Pink and blue have gendered meaning ascribed to them, but we don't do that with orange and green, And if a boy likes to dance or prefers the arts, and a girl likes to climb trees and is kind of a tomboy, that's fine. Don't drug them. Don't cut their bodies up. Talk to us about explain this why we are for gender non-conforming young people. That's fine. That's okay. God bless you. We want, be who God made you to be. But, I think that as I've conversed with people who say, "Oh, you Christians, you just like your rigid gender norms," I'm like, "Well, actually, no, I don't think so." Speak to that.
I think this is fascinating to information that we learned through some polls that we did. This is not a left versus right issue. The vast majority of Americans, Republican, Independent, Democrat, believe that what is happening through transgenderism is wrong. You know, we asked we asked Americans in a poll, and it was representative of the US population. What percentage of people believe that gender transition procedures that are permanent are okay? It was 9% of Americans believe that. Only 9% believe it. Yet somehow the 9% control the agenda for everyone else. How's that possibly happening? Well, the biblical understanding, which is also the biological understanding, that when we say God made us in his image, then he made them male and female, is that God made them with male and female bodies and masculine and feminine souls. That's the Christian understanding of it. It's not the case that there's one spectrum with extreme masculinity on one end and extreme femininity on the other, and that if you somehow stray over the line, that maybe you're actually born in the wrong body. Why would you only have one spectrum? Well, from a secular worldview, only one thing exists, and that is the material world. Okay, so why would you have two spectra? It doesn't even make any sense. Everybody's on this spectrum. The ironic thing about transgender is that it ends up enshrining the very stereotypes that it seeks to diminish. No one goes to a drag show expecting to see men who are dressed like women normally dress. They go expecting to see people who are extravagant, even misogynistically clownish in their mockery of womanhood. Okay, that's the whole point of the show. That's what makes it shocking. So as Christians, I think we have the opportunity to go back and say, no, there's not one spectrum with extreme masculinity on one end, extreme femininity on the other end. There are actually two spectra. There's a male spectrum and there is a female spectrum. And in the male spectrum, you have young men who are extremely involved in outdoor activities and sports and hunting, and you have young men who are very interested in art and music, and they're very sensitive. Then among young women, you have those who are very athletic and outdoors and going hunting, and then you have some who are very feminine. But the biology in this is fascinating. Dr. Leonard Sachs, who's both a medical doctor and a psychologist, PhD, has said the most tomboyish girl has more in common with the most feminine girl than she does with the most feminine boy. And that's in all kinds of ways, including brain function. So we document all of this in the ebook. I think it's really important to understand. We're not trying to enshrine cultural stereotypes. We're trying to understand what biblical aspects are so that we can recognize how male and female were designed by God to harmonize together for the good of humanity.